Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here with you today. We are going to talk about Bitcoin in a PowerPoint here, the Tale of Two Systems. So I'm going to take the US monetary system and the Bitcoin monetary system, and I'm going to compare and contrast them so we can see just the differences that they have and some of the solutions that Bitcoin brings to the table as far as what we're struggling with the US monetary system. So usually when I start out this presentation, I say one thing: I am talking to you about money, but I am not here to sell you anything. So everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm doing, this is a completely nonprofit advocacy. It's a tale of two systems. My first question is, how often do you think about money? My guess is all the time. So whether we're shopping, whether we're saving, whether investing, really money is on our minds almost 24/7. When you get up in the morning, are you going to pack your lunch or are you going to buy your lunch out? What about the amazing coffee up the street? Will you make it yourself or buy it from there? So we're making monetary decisions all the time. But have you ever taken the time to just step back to try to understand how money works? And as I mentioned before, we have a fairly complex monetary system that we're working within. This is the US dollar monetary system. But at the end of the day, money's job really is fairly simple. It's to accurately reflect the value of our work. So let's step back and think about value of our work very quickly. What does our money represent? It represents our time. It represents our effort. It represents our energy. It represents our sacrifice. Maybe our sacrifice of not being with our families as much as we want to, or the sacrifice of having hobbies that we have to set aside in order to work. So we want our money to accurately reflect the value of our work. Now that's a little bit different than when we get into things like economic value of like how much money goes into certain spheres. But at the end of the day, we want a sound money that's going to, again, the end of the day, accurately reflect the value of our work. So we're talking about this in the context of systems, right? But one thing I do want you to remember is that money is very personal. A little brief story from my family personally, because as I was digging into what Bitcoin is and how it works, I started asking questions of, well, how has the current system impacted my family historically? So in the 1930s, the value of my great-grandfather's work was destroyed because of bank mismanagement. And I'm sure, everyone knows what this is referring to. It's the Great Depression. I'm sure you guys, if you looked historically, would have had maybe similar stories with your family members. But the value of his work was destroyed because of that mismanagement. But that, you may say, well, that was like almost 100 years ago. So let's look a little bit later in history. So this is my dad. You can see him out there in front of his tractor. In 1986, the value of my father's work was also destroyed. But this time, it was because of the government's mismanagement of the money. Did any of y'all remember the agricultural recession of the 1980s? Yes, we were those who lost our entire farm because what had happened was the government had inflated the money to the point that they needed to get a handle on it, so they raised interest rates. And you're looking at like 21% on interest rates for these small farmers on things like seed, on fertilizer, on equipment. So it actually wiped out a fairly large population of small farmers because of the decisions that were made to get inflation under control. But at the end of the day, as I look back on these personal stories, the reality is that when we mentioned value of work earlier, what they lost was time with me. What my dad lost was time with me. What my great-grandfather lost was time with his family, and what money represented. So even more so than just the money itself, they lost what the money had represented. Well, money makes it easier to trade what you have for what you want, right? So it's pretty hard to trade eggs for a cow for a house for eggs, that type of thing. So money solves that problem. because it makes it easy to trade so we don't have to have a barter system. So that's what money does. It's valuing our work by empowering us to purchase what we need and what we want. But money does not operate alone, right? It works in a monetary system. And a monetary system, just very basic, very simply, it creates, distributes, and regulates money. So the US dollar obviously is the money that we use in the monetary system. Trustmark, right up the street. So these are the main players within the US monetary system. The banks, like the local banks, the central bank, Federal Reserve, obviously the government, and then how we fund everything, or most things, with taxes. So these are the major players in our monetary system. Now, a monetary system has to manage two things: who owns what money and the total amount of money. So we're going to look at this as a spreadsheet, like the US dollar system spreadsheet. So this is the number that most people think about. My dollars. How much money do I have? But this number is also important, the dollars in the system. Now, why is that important? Well, because to determine our purchasing power, we divide my dollars by the dollars in the system, and that way we know what we can buy. That determines our purchasing power. So, for example, if I have $100 or $1,000 in the system, my purchasing power is 10%. So if I have 10% of the dollars in the system, I can buy 10% of the stuff. But what happens when the supply of dollars increases? My purchasing power goes down. So now, when the dollars in the system increased by $1,000, my purchasing power decreased by half. So let's ask the question, how many dollars are there exactly? Because it changes what I can buy, the value of my dollars. Well, currently there are $22 trillion in the system, at least. So right now, when this PowerPoint was built, this was 1 or 2 months ago, so figures may have changed a tiny bit, but $100 can buy a 1 gram set of gold earrings. But has the US dollar supply always been 22 trillion, and has $100 always bought this much? Well, I'm sure just looking around your room, y'all know that no, it's bought more than that before. So the US prints 7% more dollars on average every year. So from 1960 to 2025, we saw 75 times the growth of dollars within the system. So 286 billion in the 1960s up to 22 trillion in 2025. So yeah, in 1960, 286 billion, and now it's 22 trillion. Just to bring it home with Big Macs, in 1968, a Big Mac would cost 45 cents. Now it's up to $5.29. Now, has making Big Macs gotten any more difficult? No. If anything, it's gotten easier. So you would think they would be cheaper, but with the price of inflation, it's gone up 12 times. So, and if you like soup as opposed to Big Macs, it's gone up 10 times from 12 cents to $1.23. Same stuff is 10 times more expensive. But wait, there is a caveat here. Hasn't that number gone up too? Haven't our wages increased? Yes, but only by half of inflation. So wages now, if we're using Big Macs and soup still, wages now buy half as much soup and Big Macs in 2025 as they did in 1975. So, it may seem like a decrease in purchasing power, again, is not simply, oh, I'm losing money or I'm gaining money or whatever. It's a decrease in the value of our work. So what's going on here? Well, again, going back to the spreadsheet, banks keep spreadsheets with the green numbers, my money. Each bank records who owns what money. The Federal Reserve makes sure we're not double spending, so two people don't own the same dollars. And it's actually just a huge database. It's run on big computers, it's a spreadsheet, they're keeping track of all the dollars in the system. But what about the dollars in the system? How does it change? Well, obviously we have the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, we've got Jerome Powell, the head of it, and they determine how many dollars are in the system. All right, so if dollars in the system go up easily, purchasing power is decreasing. And as the number of dollars goes up, the value of the dollars goes down. And so this is one of the most powerful visuals to me. Because in 1935, your dollar was worth $1. It has lost 95% of its value since then. And that now it's worth 5 cents. So your purchasing power is worth 5 cents with $1. And again, as you can see down there on the right, this is from the US Federal Reserve Bank. So, you know, we're sourcing this from the people who are actually in control of the system. If that tells you anything, as far as recognition that yes, this is what's going on. All right, so could we tie the number of dollars to gold? A lot of people mention, oh, well, what if we went back to the gold standard? As you probably remember, we did make a paper promise for gold back in the day, but in 1971, the US government broke that promise and took us off the gold standard. So back in the day, you had a $10 Federal Reserve note that would say $10 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. So you could literally take your $10 and get gold coins. But if you pull out a $10 right now, there's no more terminology like that on it. It's literally the piece of paper that just says $10. So they took us off the gold standard. But what about different governments? So this is the relative good news. The US dollar is king. It is globally. It is the most used monetary system. It is, you know, a store of value for a lot of different people in a lot of different nations. So that's the good news. The bad news is that even though the US dollar is king, every country is printing money, and so the loss of value we've seen with the US dollar is actually even worse. So purchasing power has radically decreased in a number of different countries. So are there any other options? Well, obviously, that's what I'm here to talk about. The Bitcoin monetary system. So everyone asks the question, well, what exactly is Bitcoin? And that's a great question, so let's dig into that. Well, Bitcoin is actually a monetary system, and it runs on software. And it's a software that works like a spreadsheet. So again, similar to the US dollar, it runs on computers. It keeps track of my Bitcoin, your Bitcoin, and most importantly, it limits the total amount of Bitcoin in the system to 21 million. Does anybody remember how many US dollars there are in the system? 22 trillion, and no one knows where that's gonna, you know, the top is gonna be on that. So this is one of the most important aspects of Bitcoin, is that it limits it. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin made. All right, let's see. The Bitcoin software, it has hard-coded rules, so it keeps track of who owns what, and it enforces that 21 million limit. So rule number one, who knows what? How does it keep track of that? So the technical aspect and the encryption aspect of this is absolutely brilliant. It's also somewhat beyond my brain capacity, because as you can see, it would take all the computers in the world 1 billion trillion years to crack one Bitcoin key. Now, there's a difference between the self-custody of Bitcoin, which is you hold the Bitcoin yourself, you know, you are the one who is in custody of it, and using an exchange or, you know, Bitcoin ETF or anyone else to hold your money. Those can be hacked. But when it's in self-custody, that's what this is talking about, with the encryption keys that are holding it. All right, so the computers running Bitcoin software, they connect to each other and they make exact copies of the spreadsheet. So if one computer goes down, there's over 100,000 plus Bitcoin computers have the same numbers. So they're all working with the same data. Bitcoin is hard-coded disconnect, so if anyone tries to make 22 million, they are immediately disconnected from the network. So they won't have Bitcoin to connect with anyone anymore. If I have the key, I can send or spend my Bitcoin. So, you know, one of the areas that Bitcoin is really being used right now is as a store of value, but the reality is it can be used as a medium of exchange as well. But with the adoption of it right now, it's mainly a store of value. But like I said, it can also be used as a currency. All right, and the numbers change on every computer when I send and spend my Bitcoin. And then let's look at rule number 2. So enforcing that 21 million limit. This was very important. So as you know, the White House is looking at establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and they did their homework. The Bitcoin protocol permanently caps the total supply of Bitcoin at 21 million coins and has never been hacked. Again, that's different than exchanges, which exchanges can be hacked, but the Bitcoin protocol, the software itself, has never been hacked. It's been around since 2008. So that's pretty significant. All right, the value of Bitcoin is going up as more people adopt. And sadly, the money in our dollar system seems to be losing value just as we speak. So the money in the Bitcoin system is gaining value, but, and this is super, super important, Bitcoin's price is volatile. It is definitely volatile. So let's talk about that for just a second. Where does price volatility come from? Well, we're still super early in the adoption phase. Remember I mentioned it as a store of value is the main way it's being used as opposed to medium of exchange. So we're currently at 3%. I think we might have increased that 3 to 5% adoption, which comparatively speaking is like online banking in '96, social media in 2005, and the internet in 1990. All right, so the other thing to remember with Bitcoin price volatility is that the world itself is volatile. Money is impacted by, it can be impacted by tariffs, it can be impacted by wars. And if you have a money that is increasing in adoption, you're gonna feel it. You're going to feel those ups and downs. And just to give perspective, the US dollar is about 18% of the world's money. So again, dollar is king, significant amount of the world's money. So the US dollar is like a large ship in a large ocean. It seems to be sinking, but it's slowly. And in comparison, Bitcoin is only 1.3% of the world's money. So its market cap 1.6 trillion when this was created. So Bitcoin's like a small boat in a big ocean. Smaller systems are going to go up and down more easily. Larger systems are more stable, and Bitcoin, as it's adopted, will get there. So when in doubt, zoom out. Bitcoin's price history every day, obviously you can see some drops, jagged, very much so. Pull back out every year, it's getting smoother. Every 2 years, smoother. 3 years, smoother. 4 years, it's a gentle slope. So it really pays to be able to zoom out and say, okay, I feel this volatility, but in the midst of this volatility, it's still going up. So one of the things I want to make sure that I speak very clearly is Bitcoin is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is not a, I'm going to throw $5,000 at it and then I'll be a millionaire tomorrow. That is not what it is. As Roy Amara says, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate in the long run. So I never recommend people, get on the Bitcoin train because of the hype or because, you keep hearing people talk about it or things like that. Study it, look at it. That's what, as he had introduced, I was a skeptic. I thought it was a scam initially, but as I actually learned what it is and the problems that it solves, that's what made me realize, oh, I need to be taking this more seriously. So all that to say, now we have a choice, and that's something my great-grandfather and my father never had. They did not have any other system they could use, but now we have a choice. And Bitcoin solves some major problems in the system that we're currently using. So thank y'all so much for coming today.